And now, it's time for that great new game show.
It's the PowerShell Podcast. It's all about PowerShell and the PowerShell community.
The PowerShell Podcast.
And now, here's your hosts, Jordan Hammond and Andrew Plaw.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the PowerShell Podcast. I'm your well of mediocrity, Jordan, with super mega star Andrew Plaw. And today we have special guest Chrissy LeMaire, which if every time we've talked about SQL and PowerShell, the name Chrissy LeMaire pops up. Everyone wants to meet and talk to Chrissy about SQL.
And hey, the same experience with you and the PowerShell Podcast. Congratulations on a whole super long time of doing the PowerShell Podcast. My Spotify Wrapped. You both were the second most listened to podcast, and the only reason that you weren't the first was because the Wall Street Journal had more minutes.
That makes sense. Well, this time we're going to have a couple of extra months over 2023, since we're still going to do this weekly. We're coming for it. We're going to take number one on your list there.
Perfect. Can't wait.
There's nothing better to start off a new year with one of the most anticipated guests in the PowerShell podcast's history. We're 43 episodes strong. I guess maybe we're 45 episodes strong. But to start off a new year with our potentially the best pickle we've ever had on the podcast. If you're joining us on YouTube, Chrissy is a pickle.
I am a pickle. I'm often a pickle. This is my conference pickle that I put on.
I like it. Snapchat camera, I think, right?
Yeah.
There is a common theme. I've commented on this. Whenever we're talking to anyone, especially about DBATools, it's always someone's like, yeah, I was looking into SQL and PowerShell and it was kind of neat and having an okay time. And then I met Chrissy and my entire life got awesome.
I think that it's because I love PowerShell, and I think that whenever I talk to other people, I actually did practice a way to just like those combo kill commands. You always bust out with those first, and you get them super hooked. And then like later on, you could slow it down a little bit. But that is intentional. And I'm glad that happens because PowerShell to me is the most exciting thing. I know that I'm known also as a SQL person, but like SQL, I like it because it's a mix of administration and development. But PowerShell is exactly what I've wanted my entire life. And I love whenever other people get it, that moment that they're like, oh, and I live for that because that's the moment that I myself want whenever I'm working in IT.
Can you take us back to, you say that you love PowerShell and it's clearly had a huge impact and played a big role in your career, but where in your career did it meet you? Like, were you more of a junior and then you found PowerShell and you've been rocketing up since? Like, what's the kind of foundations of your career leading into PowerShell?
So I started working in IT at around 96, and I got, so you do the calculation. It's been it's like 20, it's a lot of years. And whenever I got on, online in general, I was on IRC, and there was a whole bunch of like really cool free things. And there was this thing called the egg drop bot. That was a bot that was similar to the bots that we see in Discord. And that was using a programming language called Tickle or TCL. And whenever I first started working with the egg drop bots, I got really excited about them. And then I sort of went into like T-SQL and VB script. And then I actually got into PowerShell in 2005. I was working in Los Angeles. And there was something called the Professional Developers Conference from Microsoft. I think it's currently called Build. But back then it was called the PDC. And I was looking through the itinerary and I saw this thing that was, it was a new shell from Microsoft, which I was really excited about because I did have a Linux background and Microsoft always got dissed. And I loved Microsoft products because basically they were well funded, right? Like any place that you would work at, if they used Microsoft products, if they used SQL Server, then you were probably going to get paid decently well. And so I loved Windows. I lived in the Linux world, and I was so excited to see a shell that it said like all of this stuff like OOP, the object-oriented programming and all of this. And I didn't really get it, but I knew that one day I would, and I would love it. And I went to the session. I believe that Jeffrey Snover was presenting. Like, I tried to do some historical research on it, and I think that I concluded it was him. But when I went out to the lab, Lee Holmes was there. And actually, we got along so well. He's so nice, and we both love bass in our car. We both have some 12s. It's ridiculous. I think he has more 12s than I do. But yeah, he came over to my house, and I fed him gumbo. And then he invited me to his house, and he took me to Vancouver, and we had poutine, and that was it. So it's a long time ago, back in 2005. At that point, I was a senior DBA, but I wasn't any sort of developer. Like, I was a scripter, and I was bare. No, you know what? Actually, I take that back. I was a PHP developer and a classic ASP developer. And I'd been doing that, been paid to do that. Actually, doing it put me through school, which is awesome.
So I'm gonna weigh in on the food here. I'm gonna give it to Lee Holmes, just because poutine. That is, there's like 12 ways to get bad poutine in Utah. I haven't had good poutine in a long time.
It changed my life. I actually, whenever I graduated from school, my wife was like, "Oh, what do we do to celebrate?" And I was like, "Let's drive 10 hours to that place in France, eat some poutine." Well, it was 5 hours there. We ate poutine. We had a nice Blanche beer, and then we drove all the way back. That's like, I'm a huge, huge dedicated poutine fan.
I had a restaurant I went to all the time, specifically for the poutine. They dropped it from the menu, and I haven't been back.
No.
They're dead to me.
You know, you could ask them. They might do it for you. There was a company the pizza company that sold like etouffee pizza, and I went there and they didn't have it anymore. And I was like, "Oh my God, I love your etouffee pizza." And they're like, "Oh, we'll make it for you." So you could try. Maybe they'll have some poutine for you.
I'll have to give it a try.
So I love the food, but I can't believe. So you knew Lee Holmes before PowerShell was released. You kind of ran into him and had this interaction with him, if I'm understanding the timeline correctly.
Yeah, well, so PowerShell was released to web in like 2006, and we were hanging out in 2005. It was called Monad at the time. And I was actually he's so nice. He allowed me to be a technical editor on the PowerShell cookbook, the first version. The first like 6 chapters, which was cool because I didn't understand it took me so long to get PowerShell. And so I was kind of the perfect audience. Well, I was a pretty good audience person for the first 6 chapters. So I edited those, and I got my name in a book, and I would oh my God, I was like telling my family, go to Barnes and Nobles, pick up this book, open it up, and look in the beginning, and my name is there. It was a milestone.
That's huge.
Yes.
We oftentimes talk to people, and kind of writing a book is a huge experience for them. And it sounds like you had this experience and were pushing your career forward and taking risks in the original days of PowerShell.
Well, no, I was really a technical editor. And so I wasn't writing it, but I was.
Sure.
Yeah, I was technically editing it, which was I put that on my resume. Like the second that he asked me, I went and I updated my resume.
Yeah. So how was that? I imagine you'd be fearful at first.
I wasn't fearful because Lee is so kind. I'm sure whenever he first offered it, I can imagine being like, "Oh, I mean, I can maybe technically edit a SQL book, but I don't know if I'll be useful." And he's like, "You're the perfect person. in the beginning chapters, you can let me know how it goes on. And it was advanced, but I had such a good time doing it. I remember I lived in North Beach, San Francisco. And I would go to this little Italian place and I would have some red wine and some espresso. And I would just sit there for hours and like edit this book. And so I just remember it being an awesome experience.
So not to bring this back to food, but I can tell already we're best friends because all of your memories are based on this was happening and this is what I had.
It's
true. I love that. That's how I vacation.
Exactly. That's how we vacation too. I love finding whenever we first moved here around Frankfurt, we love like getting local things. And the local thing here is, and I'm going to just butcher the name, but it's called Spundekas, which is like, whipped cream cheese, the Philly whipped cream cheese, like it's almost like that, but it's way, way better, which is way better than the previous regional cuisine that I used to have in southern Belgium. Their specialty in Mons was tuna wrapped in canned peaches.
I don't think I'm on board for that one.
No, it was as terrible as you can imagine. I was like, well, there must be like some sort of combo that whenever you put it together, it's just delicious. And it just was not at all. And so, but I still love the experience of it. Like I'll eat some kidneys and gag, but it makes me laugh. Like I love enjoying some good food and some terrible food, as long as it's like prepared deliciously.
Fair.
So, I think the other takeaway I have from this is back in 2006, you told Lee Holmes, no, you did that wrong. Let me show you how to PowerShell.
Oh, no, I probably said, I probably have this wrong. I didn't understand this. And when I ran it, it was all red. Is more along the lines of, I was a quite shy technical editor. I mean, I didn't have any authority to say anything like that. So
that's not how it played out up here. Yeah. Up here, you put him in his place.
Lee sounds like such a gem of a person. So awesome. I had one experience, well, I've had a couple times running into him, but one time in particular at PowerShell Summit where I had like my little thing I was taking notes on, my little book, and I walked away and left it there. And I came back later and saw he put like some shortened URL for a free copy of the PowerShell cookbook, I believe it was. It's like Lee was here. I couldn't figure out what characters they were, so it didn't work. But the intention was just lovely. Thank you so much.
That dude knows everything. Like he knows calligraphy. Whenever I actually had went to his house the last time that I was in Seattle, and I was like, "Oh, hey, what are you doing?" And he was like, "I'm printing out parts with my laser printer to fix my laser printer." And I was like, of course you are. I think he invented the part with like CAD. And he's just like one of the most advancedly genius people that I've ever met. And so super nice too.
Yeah. He knows like memory systems, learning systems. He's very, very cool resource. And shout out to that book, the PowerShell cookbook. Very cool resource.
I love it. That
Chapters 1 through 6, I hear, are like spot on.
Best. It's the cleanest, best code I've ever read.
Thank you, everyone. I'm responsible for that.
All right, so I assume you just stopped with books right there. You have no other books out since that one.
No, actually, from there, I was like, ooh, I dipped my toe in this pool. So then I started doing technical edits for Pact. And then whenever I started DBATools, we were on Trello and there were just like so many of us. And at the time I was obsessed with those Manning books, the MVP deep dives. And because that was definitely like one of my biggest resources as I'm working on DBATools and literally learning PowerShell. Because, like with a module that big, and that in depth, there was so much learning to do. And we had this Trello board, and I was like, oh my God, why don't we all write a book together? Like we'll each take a chapter, sort of like the PowerShell conference book. But then like over time, like everybody was so busy, and it never really, even though we put all the chapters together, it never really solidified in my mind. But people kept asking, like, do we have a DBATools book? Do we have a DBATools book? And I was like, oh, it's coming. And then somebody said, can I please have DBATools in a month of lunches on Twitter? And I wish I could find that tweet, because I was like, oh my God, this is the format. And so I went to the Manning's website. I loved Manning, the PowerShell in action. Oh my God. It's the one by Bruce Payette and Richard Sidaway. That was like one of my favorite books in the world. It's a huge book. It's like great for like a Sunday morning when you want to relax, like read about the why and not just like the how. They're one of my favorite publishers. And so I went to their website and I downloaded the little the little table of contents thing, like the proposal. And I put it all together that day and I submitted it. And then I didn't hear anything. So I hit them up on Twitter. Like I went in their DMs and I was like, hello, how long does it take to get a response back? And they're like, oh, you should have gotten one. And then I did soon thereafter. And actually they said, this isn't usually the kind of book that we publish, but because you are the creator of DBATools, we want to work this out. So they kind of gave me some tips on how to rewrite it. I rewrote the proposal, and the day that I graduated, which was also, around the same time that I went get some poutine, I got a letter from Manning and a book deal, and it was magical. And that was the most ridiculous day of my life, to both graduate with my master's degree and get a book deal on the same day. I was like, this is the pinnacle. And still, there hasn't been a day that's topped it. What up?
Wow. So it sounds almost like you've kind of gone full circle to that Lee Holmes PowerShell cookbook experience.
And then I also have a cookbook. So then, if you go to Amazon, you type in Real Cajun Recipes, there's like 4 cookbooks. So yes, it all comes together, and Lee Holmes is the reason.
I'm actually upset I didn't know about the cookbooks. All of my research, and I guess I was specifically focusing on PowerShell and SQL for my research, but I will be definitely looking at those cookbooks.
Yeah, I did it with my best friend, and it was actually very, very hard to do an electronic cookbook. All of the tools are really archaic, and I'm glad that I'm not the one in charge of like the arty part, because that's his job. He does all the research into how to put it together. But yeah, it was really hard, but I really loved it. I actually have some clips from the people in my hometown that have a super thick accent, like way thicker than mine. And they're like, hey, I love some gumbo tea. And like, it just makes me laugh. It's super cool. So if you get the electronic version, which is available on Kindle Unlimited, you can hear them talk. It's in the Thanksgiving edition. And then we have like a Christmas edition and a Mardi Gras edition, and then the classic from like 2004.
I love it. So if you're listening to this, you're not a DBA, you're not into SQL at all, we got cookbooks for you. You got to eat, right?
Right.
Good.
Eat some boudin. That's the best.
So if you don't mind me asking, who played the role of Chrissy LeMaire for DBATools in a bunch of months? Who went through and did the technical edit for your part in that book?
Mike Shepard did the technical edits. And the person that I interacted most with was, her name is Frances, and she was the development editor. And I didn't realize, like, whenever you get a Manning book, they're so damn good. And now I understand why. And it's because we had like 6 or 7 editors that did different things. And we also, we had reviewers, and I think that there were about 45 reviewers, like with each part of, with each third of the book, it would go out to like 15 people. But yeah, it was so cool working with with Frances, like, even though she's not technical, she would like call me up and she's like, hey, so you mentioned that DBATools works on Linux. Why would somebody want it on Linux? And I was like, oh, and I thought it was like a genuine question, right? So I started explaining it to her and she was like, put that in your book. And so she just kept asking, why? And, you know, that's the difference between a book and PowerShell help. Like PowerShell help will show you how to do it. It's a manual, right? But whenever you're writing a book, you actually explain why someone would want to run PowerShell on Linux or DBATools on Linux and why they'd want to do things. And so I learned so much about writing from that process. And honestly, and I told them this, if they wouldn't have paid me to write that book, I would have paid them for the experience because it just made me an overall better writer.
That is really cool. And I think that what you're describing there with the feedback you got from the editor highlights how important it is to have people with different backgrounds and perspectives. And also how, if you're a person who's not the technical expert, you can still provide value by asking curious questions that can lead to new discoveries and all kinds of good stuff. That's
absolutely
very cool.
Yeah, that's it. I really did like that because whenever they sent out the questionnaires to the 15 people each time, they did have varied backgrounds. They weren't just PowerShell people. They weren't just advanced people. They weren't SQL people. It was that varied background. And so they asked questions that I know other people would ask as they're reading the book, you know, that don't have the exact background that we were going for. It's a really, really great point.
I love that stuff, to be honest. It's so cool.
Anytime you start moving into the intricacies of human interaction, Andrew gets all excited.
I love that.
See, he needs to find a way to combine his passions. Like you took SQL and PowerShell and you made something beautiful with it. Right now, he's got his love of human interaction in PowerShell. I'm not sure how you combine that though.
I think we're doing it, man.
I know. I was about to say, I think it's community work. Totally.
Yeah.
This is it. It's perfect.
A lot of what I think of, and we don't have to get too deep into this, but like with anyone, anywhere on a team, you're a leader in your own right by like what you do and other people see it. So like one way that we can all make an impact is just conduct ourselves in a way that we'd like to see replicated. And you don't have to intentionally teach people things, but if you're like a good person being authentic, a lot of times people might try being kind and listening more and seeing things that are successful for someone else.
Absolutely. I love that. And also I've noticed setting boundaries. If you set boundaries, it allows, and I started practicing this at work. And what shocked me was that my bosses, I was kind of scared to do it. Who's not, right? You have to tell somebody no, or you have to, put down some restriction. And I thought that my bosses would get really mad. And instead they had a lot of respect for me. And then that allowed other people to see that interaction and then, stand up for their own boundaries and things like that. I love the human interaction part too, and the leadership.
Yeah. And by doing that communication, you create a safer environment for everyone who works there, where they're more willing to take risks and more willing to contribute in a better way. So it's good for the bottom line as well. It's not just good for us as individuals.
I like you, man. That's cool.
That was one of the main points of his talk last year at Summit was soft skills will make you more money.
Nice.
He didn't focus on he didn't focus on it because it's not about, he claims it's not about money for him, but if I offered him money, he wouldn't turn it down.
Hey, it's also about money for sure.
Yeah, but to truly be successful requires soft skills, which is unfortunate for me.
No, we all got stuff to work on, man. It's a good opportunity. Okay. Wow. We just covered a lot and I've loved it so far. So you mentioned you're vaguely French. We got some gumbo. Do you mind telling us where you're kind of from? I mean, I think some of us can kind of guess, but
yeah. I was from Southwest Louisiana, and I actually, whenever I was 18, I moved to California. And first of all, everybody thinks that New Orleans is like the only city in all of Louisiana, which drove me crazy because it was like 3 hours east. It wasn't even close to where I was. And Yeah, I was in I was in California, and somebody said, "Oh, I don't even like Cajun food," and I was like record scratch, and I was like, "Have you even had it in Louisiana?" And he's like, "No, I had it in San Diego," and I was like, "Well, I guess. Are you gonna
Basically just
like?"
said they hate flavor.
I mean, well, no, but then I went to all the Cajun places that were super fake, and I could totally see why he would think that. But that's like why I started that cookbook, and where the website in general, because I did SQL and I did ASP, so I combined those, and then I started visiting up in Canada, like Prince Edward Island, all of those places, because that's where the Cajuns are from. So if you don't know, Cajuns were expelled by the British in like 1755 from Canada, on the coast, like Halifax and things like that. And they all came down to Louisiana. And then, we started using the same food and resources and stuff like that. And so, yeah, it was really cool. I was very proud. I was a proud Cajun. Went up to Canada. And I'm like, hi, I'm, former Acadia. Yeah, so it's Acadia, and you can see over the course of time how it could be like, oh my God, my French teacher in high school used to do this. I don't know if I could do it because I always thought she was super cheesy. Okay, let's see. Acadia, Akagi, Cajun. But there's like more in the middle. But you see how it got there from Acadia to Cajun. You're not getting it, Andrew? Do you get it?
No,
Okay.
So
I'm
I
honestly
would
writing a deep question.
So I
Oh
wouldn't.
no! I'm so sorry. Called you out.
I wouldn't do this because it'd be unprofessional. I definitely wouldn't be looking up your recipes while we're talking. But for your beignets, the first ingredient is shortening. That's some real Southern cooking. To see that in the recipe.
We have. I mean, if you do a search for Lord, there's going to be some Lord there. That's all the stuff that we grew up with. We do have a healthy section. Like whenever I moved to California, I tried to like kind of mix the two together, and I have some like vegetarian recipes, and people weren't very happy about that. But I was like, you taste my rice dressing and you tell me that's not delicious. And then they would, and they're like, man, that's delicious. And I was like, exactly. And so, yeah, vaguely French. What's cool is that I moved to Belgium, and I moved to the southern part, which is called Wallonia, which they speak French. And it was amazing. And they have like the cutest little accents whenever they speak like English. So the French speaking English is the Belgian speaking English is like my favorite accent in the world. And that's also the place, by the way, that they invented fries or frites. But they speak French. So the Americans thought that they were French. So they called them French fries, but they're really Belgian fries.
Gosh, I'm getting hungry.
That's right. I need to build a PowerShell module that will cook food for me. I just import recipe.
I saw GitHub Action that brewed some coffee, and so it's right on the horizon. It's around the corner. You could do it.
So we attempted to do that here at PDQ with the API for one of the coffee makers. So we bought a new one, and they had upped their security between models.
No.
So we couldn't do it. So I had written the code and it worked, but I never got to see it live because we could no longer buy the old model because apparently it had which just cracks me up. The coffee maker has a security. But yeah, so it was it's an idea that never quite made it, but I love the idea.
Heartbreaking. So close.
Chrissy, thinking back to your career, it sounds to me, if it were me in your shoes, like there were those couple of moments that you mentioned related to like the books that you were involved with. It sounds like those would have been like kind of pivotal moments where you are having to reach a next level or kind of pushing your boundaries maybe slightly. And whether that be through, it sounds like with the Month of Lunches book, kind of you drove that initiative, whereas with the cookbook with Lee Holmes, he provided a little bit of support to help you do that initially. I think that you are a great example of how awesome and important it is to support people, even if it's just hey, you can do it. You're like, oh, hey, you can actually do it, because so many people have that natural first response of like, oh, wait, no, this is outside of my wheelhouse. Oh, I can't do this now. I haven't done this before. And now you're at the point where it seems like DBATools is this thriving community with so many people kind of getting so much value in their careers and personal life and human interactions. And there's people giving talks and developing new things and collaborating. How has DBATools turned into a community in the way it has? Like, I'm sure it's intentional to a certain degree, but I imagine there's some part of just humans kind of doing their thing that you got to observe.
I've actually always been a community builder ever since I was younger. I remember in high school, that was something that was important to me. I always wanted people to feel included. Whenever I was a kid, my dad was actually a narcotics officer. And because, you're like, oh, cool, my parents, I would get these drug books, right? And like read about drugs and educate myself. It was the 80s. There was like this whole just say no thing. And I remember one of the parents of one of my close friends, she said, you can't hang out with her anymore. She's weird. And she reads these drug books, and it hurt my feelings so deeply. And it made me feel like such an outsider for just being myself. And I always thought that, if I had any sort of influence, that I would be as inclusive as possible and set that tone. And, and I really love humans, and I love friends. I love being excited with people who have the same interests. And with PowerShell and SQL Server, DBATools, I learned a lot from that. I had some hypotheses based on some of the previous community building that I'd done. I used to have this message board. You're probably not familiar. So there's this folk singer. Her name is Ani DeFranco. And she was like super popular, and it's a community, like it was a fan site, but then it also became a community. And then I got to work for her, and I was like, oh my God, thank you, SQL Server, because they were using SQL Server. And I got to like meet this rock star, go backstage. It was really cool. But I learned a lot from that community. And then whenever I moved to Louisiana, I had this LGBT community that I built. And whenever DBATools came around, I think that it was the perfect time, right? Like, people knew that Microsoft Docs were getting onto GitHub and they're becoming open source. And Microsoft started pushing a lot of open source. And we all were there at the perfect time to say, we know how to do this kind of barely. We're doing our best. And we can help you. We can help onboard you as well. And so we just had a whole bunch of very motivated, very excited people. And there was, we didn't have the module called SQL Server from, well, it used to be called SQL PS from Microsoft. Just it wasn't really hitting the mark. So there was that market, for a SQL Server module. And I think that all the tools were there, but GitHub was absolutely pivotal in the whole success of DBATools. And around that time, Slack came out, and like corporate networks were allowing Slack traffic through. So we all had a place to chat. So it was all of the tools and all of the perfect reasons were there back in 2016, 2017 to join. And, we all learned together. I mean, before DBATools, I actually hadn't made a module. Everything was a script because I had that Linux background. And so I only came from, it's a script. Why would I put it in a module to like load it twice? That makes no sense to me. And people are like, put this in a module. So I was like, fine. So it was like conference-driven development. I took all of these 10 scripts and I put them into a module, and we kind of went that way. But yeah, it was perfect timing. All the technology. Microsoft was a huge part of that. They let us use their management objects, and repackage them and redistribute them. And so, yeah, all came together.
So cool to see. It almost feels like it plays a similar role in people's lives that PowerShell does. Like, they kind of get it. They're able to be super efficient. It kind of clicks with them. It's an entry point into PowerShell for some.
Yes.
And further automation, and kind of a nice groundwork for going forward.
Totally. That was the intention, was to make insanely tedious tasks so fun. I mean, to make a migration fun, because you're sitting there and if you've done it before, you're like, oh God, this is hard. But then like you type in just a single command and you watch all of it happen, and all you're watching is you not having to do work. And it's like, it's the best feeling ever, just sitting back, executing that one thing. And you're like, oh man, the possibilities are endless.
So I've been kind of following. Occasionally I drop snippets of a friend I'm working with on PowerShell on his journey. And he just said the other day, I love PowerShell, which I love getting that text. But it turns out he just wanted a simple report of the health of certain things in the environment. And he just sat down and wrote it in PowerShell without looking for help. And he was so excited. I was pumped for him. I'm excited for his journey too. It's fun to see someone that's reluctant to pick it up to once they see the value, and then just they start automating away all of the frustration. Totally.
What module did he use for his reports?
So he works in a VMware sphere, so it was the PowerCLI.
Cool. Yeah. Oh, I really like PowerCLI. That's a really powerful module. Takes forever to load if you just load it, but once you get it, it is one of my favorite modules.
It's a really well done one there. So he's extremely technical, but it took him a long time to pick up PowerShell.
Same. I didn't start really using it every day until 2011. So even though I was introduced to it, even though in 2006, I worked with Lee Holmes, I didn't really get it until there was a project that I had to do. Well, for myself, I didn't have to, but I was like, ooh, this is the perfect kind of project. And, I just kept pushing through until the day that I woke up and I was like, oh my God, I know PowerShell. My life has changed.
I can definitely relate to that moment of taking on a project that's outside of your current scope and you just bang away at it. And it's like, oh, wow, it actually clicked now. I've been kind of lost in my brain for a while trying to put the pieces together. I know the pieces, they're not clicking, and now they are. Wow.
Love it. I love it.
And you mentioned building a community, and to me, lifting others up, like Jordan was mentioning, helping his friend, and now seeing that's such an efficient use of time. Even more so when you're building a community that is empowering people simultaneously. It's just, to me, it's a perfect example of force multiplication. And as people who are into automation and stuff like that, it appeals to us. And it's very cool to see so many people go from let's automate this process, make this migration faster, to, hey, let's write good documentation, to, hey, let's get involved in the community and change our culture at work. And, all this stuff. It's such a cool thing that we get to experience.
It has been really awesome to see people's careers grow within the community. Jess Pomfret had a meteoric rise. It was really awesome. She came in and I think that DBATools was her first experience, and she's like, oh, can I write some tests for this? And I was like, hell yeah, we need somebody who's writing, it was around the time of, it was 2017, and I had just learned about integration testing at PSConf EU. And I was like, this is what I have wanted my entire life, to literally start up a SQL server and execute a bunch of things against that. So Jess jumped in and she did that. And then the next thing I know, I'm at Data Grillin' and she's presenting and she is phenomenal. Now she has a LinkedIn course on DBATools, and she's actually a co-author on DBATools in a month of lunches. It's just been so wonderful to see so many examples of that throughout the community. So many people presenting for the first time because they're like, wait, I hang out with these people and they're presenting, I bet I can present. And then we're like, oh, we'll help you write your abstract. You can practice with me. And me and Claudio used to practice all the time. Me and Rob would work together, and man, it was so awesome going and presenting all across the world. I didn't really want to do a pre-con because that's really overwhelming and so much work. And he's like, no, it's totally this is totally doable. Let's do it together. And so, yeah, it has been, it's been a really wonderful experience to see that happen and to enable it in other people too.
Jess is a great example. She's so awesome. It's so great seeing people flourish.
Oh yeah. I think that's actually how I learned about you all.
Yeah, we were excited that she agreed to I mean, it was, I think our first guest was James because we were talking Summit. So it makes sense to have James do there. And then it was Mike and then Jess. Like it was the out the gate, like Legends of PowerShell. I was like, yeah, we'll talk to you.
I remember whenever I saw it, I was like, oh, this is exactly what I want. And I mean, clearly through all of my Spotify listening, I mean, I actually take pictures and then I never send them. I don't think every morning, cause I have the Spotify car thing and it glows this beautiful blue with y'all faces on it whenever I'm like listening in the morning, and then it's dark over here. And so I take a picture and I always intend to send it and I always forget. But yeah, that was this morning I listened to Steve Lee. It was so cool.
That was a fun episode.
Yeah.
It is very fun. It's so cool to see people going through their journeys in all different kinds of ways. And I've seen another passion project of yours or another kind of cool area you've been getting involved in, and that's Mastodon.
Oh, I'm super pumped about that.
Yeah, it's very cool.
So Mastodon, I actually joined it in 2017. Is that I heard that there was this, I don't know, maybe it was an alternative to Twitter at the time, but I joined and I was like, what is this? Like, this is super confusing. None of my friends are here. So I just kind of signed out. And then just recently, I haven't enjoyed being on Twitter. And I realized after joining Mastodon just how much I haven't enjoyed it, being on Twitter. But it's essentially so many times I've thought to myself, and I've actually tweeted, I want the 2007 internet back. You know, that like decentralized, really exciting, like just BBSs. There was this like pioneer kind of spirit, and I really missed that. And over the course of time, everything just got siloed into these singular companies that I just sat there like waiting for features, like for so long, just waiting for a simple edit button that is obvious, that's like available on all of the different platforms. And then whenever I decided to leave Twitter, there was a lot of people at the time that were doing it. So I got into it and I had to stick around. It was kind of like PowerShell, right? Where you're like, okay, I know that this is awesome, but I just kind of have to put in the work. But it's so funny because I think it took like 10 minutes of work. And I was like, oh, they're using the wrong wording, right? And so in my mind, the way that I think about Mastodon, so Mastodon is an implementation, and I could be a little bit wrong about some of the words here, but it's an implementation of something called the fediverse, and all of these different services come together. I know Matt Mullenweg, the creator of WordPress, he's actually putting Tumblr on there, and there's something called ActivityPub, but it doesn't really matter. All of this stuff comes together into this federated universe, right? And you have these different servers that you join. And I really wish they would have called them neighborhoods, because whenever you join a server, you're not limited and locked down just to the people that are on that same server. Much like IRC, you can actually join up to a greater network. So whenever you log into Mastodon, you have this little local tab, and that's everybody on your local server. So if you're on like dataplatform.social, it's all of the data platform that'll probably be talking about SQL Server or, Azure or their pets. But then you can go to the Fediverse tab, and that's all of the people. It's kind of like 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon, right? So if you connect with somebody on mastodon.social, then it'll bring in all of the content from there. And if they connect to somebody, to a person on, push.social, then that will be connected. And so everything gets connected in the same way that it does in the actual real world. And so I like the little neighborhoods. Like my neighborhood is tech.lgbt. So it's a bunch of gay tech people. So whenever I go to my little local tab. So when I go to my home tab, it's all of the people that I'm following. And finally, there's no algorithm to keep people out. Do you know how many people I followed on Twitter and I never got to see them? So I was like, oh my God. And not only that, but like my follow, like to follow or unfollow people, you have to like scroll. Like they kind of took all of your information and hid it from you. And now with Mastodon, it's easily exportable. Like you can export all of your follows. You could export all of your likes, all of your bookmarks, everything like that is so very easy. It's built into the interface, and the API is really awesome. And I actually used it within a GitHub action to do, or many GitHub actions to do a lot of fun things. So it's not just a place to chat, but as a PowerSheller who loves APIs, it's also a fun place to be and program.
So I'll be honest, social media in general is not a thing I'm big on. And I had questions. I was kind of intrigued until you said API, and now I'll probably be investigating because So I am curious though, does that run the risk of eventually like having an issue with like segmenting? So if you have like a divide in security, they can't agree on which octet's best. That doesn't matter. Right. Are they going to separate out and be multiple communities where you have to try to reach across to get all the information, or is there something there to make sure that even if people aren't getting along, it's still kind of a cohesive unit? That's my concern.
So with the moderation, and this is actually something that I like too, I feel safe on tech.lgbt, right? If I have a complaint, and if I have a complaint against harassment and people who don't experience harassment, it's so easy to be like, oh, whatever, just like get over it. But if your administrator is in the same group as you and they're like, oh my God, this again, and then they can just like ban that person. Actually, something just happened recently with Raspberry Pi. They posted a controversial post, and I actually didn't care about the primary post, but their responses underneath I felt were so toxic, right? And the vibe, that little "this is fine," there's the "this is fine" guy, puppy that's like surrounded by fire, and like that's like Twitter, but then there's like this little elephant surrounded by green plants, and the vibe on Mastodon, that's Mastodon, like "this is fine." Like Mastodon thing is it's just a chill vibe, and Raspberry Pi brought in this really aggressive, immature vibe. Like I actually ended up writing to their group, or I went to their website and I was like, contact us, and I was like, I'm an IT professional, and like you might want to check out what's going on because I'm very surprised by this person's behavior. And like that's, in a way, I felt kind of helpless, right? Because all I can do is appeal to these people, and I hope that they aren't like, ha ha, like, doesn't she know? Like, we endorse this. But what happened was, because their behavior was so egregious, they got defederated, which means that a lot of, like, there's this list, and I don't know exactly how it works, but essentially everybody agrees, because they had followed the Raspberry Pi account, they joined the federation, but there were some servers that said, you know what, this isn't what I want in my pool, and they actually defederated from it. And so, you can interact with their posts if you go there and you like intentionally go to their server, but it's not going to show up in your home tab, and you're not going to see all that infighting and all of the arguments. And the vibe on Mastodon is so much better. Like I get exactly what I want because I'm following, I follow like the infosec.exchange, and I just like follow all of these people. I'm actually seeing all of the content that they're bringing, but there isn't the vitriol and the toxicity at this point. But to your point, Jordan, I think that if you ever had an issue with somebody, getting defederated, that you didn't want, you can actually, I've seen some servers rejoin and refederate after there's, a discussion. And like Falstodon had actually gotten defederated from some servers, but then they had noticed and then they put it back, they worked together, and they rejoined back up. So that's Raspberry Pi can be redeemed if they have a redeeming behavior. But, I'm sure that they probably got defederated from my server. You could be on a server that doesn't defed, because it's really an opt-in thing.
Okay. Yeah, and that's a conversation. I don't want you to think like I'm being overly negative about it. I genuinely have questions because I've
Oh no,
yet to
I'm
join it.
please do, because other people are having the same questions as you.
It feels like a breeding ground for echo chambers, kind of, which is one of my major concerns. Because if you sit there and every time someone says, "Oh, I don't like this," so you cut them out, eventually you're going to have a whole bunch of like-minded people, which is nice for feeling comfortable, but a lot of discussion happens with disagreement. So,
as somebody who is part of the LGBT community and whose wife is Jewish, I honestly do. I personally welcome an echo chamber. If the alternative is what's happening on Twitter, then but ultimately I don't see it as that's what's going to happen. I see actually more content, and it's more of the content that I want. I see more PowerShell. I see more information security. Then I follow like Matt Blaze, and I get to see all of his posts. But at the same time, now I can follow Ian Coldwater. Before I had wanted to, but the Twitter algorithm would put their posts, like just my entire timeline, Jesse Frizzelli as well. I wasn't able to follow because it would just be my entire timeline. And now I guess like I'm seeing exactly what I want. It echoes more, in my opinion, of like the 2007 internet. That's like this like free, like, pioneering kind of place. And it hasn't become an echo chamber. I actually don't think that that's going to be a problem. Especially because maybe it'll be like, maybe my little server is going to be an echo chamber, but you don't have to be on that server. So there's like a lot of freedom there. And further, I just want to highlight, if you go to the App Store and you look at the Twitter, this is a totally kind of different point, but it also harkens back to the 2007 internet. If you go to the App Store and you look at the Twitter app, it is just like all tracking. They track your purchases. They track this, that, the other. Like it's and we all got used to that, right? Well, that's the price that I pay. But if you look at the Mastodon apps, and by the way, the Mastodon team recommends third-party apps because they just put out a basic one because everybody's like, hey, we totally need an official Mastodon app. They're like, okay, here you go, but you should probably use other stuff. So, but if you look at all the others, they don't track. And I'm like, this feels so good. There's no ads there. There's no tracking. You can talk about something and you're not going to be offered an ad to like, I stink. Oh, here's some deodorant. Like, it's the 2007 internet again.
So I would say, go ahead, Andrew.
I like how you mentioned neighborhoods earlier, because it does sound kind of like that. Like it's just your home group, and yeah, you can branch out and connect with other people and see other things and bring it in. But like fundamentally, your experience on the platform is driven by your core interests.
Exactly.
And you have more granularity and control to kind of define that experience.
Totally. Yes.
So as long as it's open up discussion, like if I am extremely passionate about the one true brace style, which I know there's some strong opinions on that. If I'm passionate about that, like if we could just have a heated disagreement about that and move on, that's fantastic. But it's only if I am, which I am prone to do, being an asshole, then there's consequences.
Yes, correct.
Okay.
And the consequences, like you can actually be removed from a server, but then if the admin is like, no, I really appreciate a-hole behavior, then somebody can just be like, well, then I don't want your server, up in my server. And so it even gets granular as far as blocking. And by the way, you as a person can block not just users, but servers as well. Kevin Beaumont accidentally blocked all of infosec.exchange and lost like 50,000 of his followers. So if you are finding that there's a server where there's a bunch of a-holes coming from it, you could block it from your own account and have far more control. And the other thing is like filtering. Like the moment that I got on there, I filtered out politics. I don't want to see it. I want to be on social media for primarily, for like tech and cats and stuff like that. And yeah, like the filtering worked super well. And on Twitter, I was literally limited to, oh my God, it was just such a miserable experience. I was limited to 200 phrases, right? But and you might think, God, Chrissy, like you're muting a lot, but you would have to mute every iteration of something, right? So it wouldn't just be, let me think of only a mildly offensive term. I don't know. Let's just say you wanted to moderate poo, right? So it would be poo, and then it would be poo apostrophe s, poos, and then it would also be poos plural. So you had to. So that's actually just 200 divided by 3 is how many filters you're going to get. And on Mastodon, it's actually, you could do # politics, man, and that's going to get rid of, all, like, I remember I had to block Republicans, Democrats, Pelosi, McCarthy, like all of these different words. And now I'm just like # politics. And it's not perfect, but it's like right out the gate, way better. And I just love the experience there because people aren't there to fight. They're just there to like talk about PowerShell.
And if we want to get on there and find other people who just want to talk about maybe some data stuff, maybe some PowerShell stuff, is there a way to find multiple people at once? Any projects related to that?
I'm so glad you asked. As a matter of fact, if you go to github.com/dataplat/mastodon, I actually have some CSV files because that's how easy it is. Like they just speak our language, right? And there's a CSV file for all of the PowerShell people. So Dave Carroll wrote Bluebird PS, and
Love that guy.
I love that guy and this module. I loved it because he wrote a command called find Twitter Mastodon links. So all I do is within my GitHub action, it's called Exodus. It will, like, you put in all your API keys and stuff, and it'll go through your own account and look through all of your followers and all the people that you follow, and it'll look for this link. Because like there's a special format for the Mastodon links, and it finds that. But what I did was I extended, like right out the gate, you could go to this thing called the Fedi Finder, and you just like click OK, and it will find all of your friends. But what I did, I wanted to find my communities. I wanted to find all of my PowerShell people. I wanted to find all of my SQL Server people. And I wrote this, and I was able to, you can actually, how like we all follow like the PowerShell Summit, and we follow PSConf.eu, or we have all of these user groups. So what I did was I told my GitHub action, go and find the followers of these accounts. Go and find who these accounts follow. Go and look at this account itself and see if it has a Mastodon link. If it does, like, add it to this list. So you can go to that GitHub repo on the DataPlat organization, and you could download these CSVs for PowerShell, for SQL Server, and for Power BI. And if you have any other, like if you're super into like Cajun stuff or like poutine, you could follow like #poutine in Exodus in the GitHub action, and it'll find all of the people talking about poutine, and then grab their Mastodon link if they have it in their pinned tweet, username, actual name, or bio.
Question here, architecturally, what's the benefit of using a GitHub action instead of, I don't know, just running a command and then uploading the CSVs manually?
I like it. I guess I actually asked that myself, right? I'm like, why am I doing this in an action? But to me, it made it accessible as somebody who loves actions and who kind of goes there by default. So because I am creating these lists for other people, where am I going to upload them to? GitHub. So it's all in the same workflow. It's all in the same place, right? I just call the action, and then I save the file to the same repo, and then I share it out. So that's good. You could run it locally. As a matter of fact, that's how I was testing it. I would just do / like the Linux days /main.ps1, and then give it the server name and whatever I was trying to follow, and I would test it locally. So you can run it locally. I mean, a GitHub action. I could have probably, Jess Pomfret actually does something similar with an Azure function.
I think, and maybe you can clarify this for me, but with the GitHub action, it may be you kind of keep the automation as part of the repository rather than like kind of kicking out to a manual console, manually doing things. If you make it so it happens on PR, maybe you could automatically have it regenerate a new CSV and then
Exactly.
some stuff like that.
And I also set mine on a schedule. So every single night, my account goes and looks to see, because people are slowly coming over. And so there might be 7 more people this week than there was last week. And every night it'll check to see if there's more of my friends. And I really like it because whenever I see like Casey Newman, joined, he left Twitter and he joined Mastodon. And then I go to follow him and I'm already following him because of my little GitHub action. So I just kind of set it and forget it.
Nice. So your GitHub action also follows.
It does. Wait, hold on. Yes. So that's another one. I made a bunch. So I have Twitter Exodus, and then I have Mastodon Influx. And Influx is the one that will import a bunch of different things. And then I also have Fossilize, which backs up your entire account. And how cool is that? Like in order to get all of your data from a corporation like Twitter, you have to like ask for it and then they'll generate it. And it's 24 hours later. So right now it's like 14 days. And then, you have to check your email. But like with Mastodon, the only limitation that you have is that you can't go above 300 requests every 5 minutes. So I just have a built-in, do it every second. And, it'll import a whole bunch of stuff. It'll export, and Fossilize backs up my entire account to a zip, and then it just saves it to my action. Because you can have artifacts with CI/CD. So I just save my account as an artifact. What?
So cool.
So what I'm hearing is, if I do join this, if you're not following me within a couple of days, then my spirit should be crushed.
Exactly.
That's my takeaway.
Yeah, I've signed up, so I'm curious to share some things. I wonder if it'll feel different to post when it feels more like a smaller group, more like a neighborhood kind of vibe, if I'll feel more comfortable sharing things.
It's really weird. My Mastodon content is slightly different from my Twitter content. It's a bit more personal. I don't know if you've noticed, but I'm pretty polished on Twitter. I'll talk about the things to talk about. And then, but I was a lot more self-censoring there. And over here in Mastodon land, I'm like, man, I remember whenever I lived in San Francisco, I look back on my Flickr account and I'm like, oh my God, I posted exactly where I live. And it was just a totally different time. And while I'm not posting exactly where I live on Mastodon, it is a bit more me over there. So I think that you will. And by the way, one thing that does suck, and I think that this is some places like infosec.exchange, they actually set up a full text indexer that makes search better. And I know over time with technologists joining Mastodon, this will get better, but right out the gate, the searching kind of sucks and you have to use hashtags. But what makes that great is that people are more eager to use a hashtag and you can follow it. So I follow the PowerShell hashtag and it shows up in my home tab, like I'm following a person. And it doesn't matter what server people are on. If they use the PowerShell hashtag, they're going to show up. And then I usually end up just following those people. Because anybody who's talking about PowerShell, I just want to hang out with it.
Love it. Well, Chrissy, so my impressions of you is you strike me as a very confident and authentic person. And I'm just curious, where does this confidence come from? And how do you view imposter syndrome? Like throughout your career, have you had to learn how to be confident, or have you always kind of had a good foundation?
God, I really love that question. I'll divide it into 2 parts. The first part is about imposter syndrome. And basically, I don't have imposter syndrome because I've worked to accept that nobody can possibly know everything, right? And because I don't expect other people to know everything, it really frees me up to have the same expectations of myself. So I believe that the reason that I don't have imposter syndrome is because I radically accept that I'm going to mess up. I don't have to know everything. I know specific people, like Stuart Moore is amazing with backup and restore. He knows like all the LSNs and all this stuff, like David Klee is amazing with VMware and all of those performance internals and things like that. And so like, I kind of see people as having their strengths, and my strength is PowerShell plus SQL Server and automating it. And so that is part of, I was really proud. My therapist said that I am therapeutically advanced, right? I've been doing therapy for a long time. And I'm eager to learn. I'm eager to, a long time ago, like I would just like fault myself for everything. So I came from the position of, oh, I'm wrong, which made me approachable, right? Because like, I'm not like, oh, you're the one that's wrong. I'm like, oh, I'm sorry, I'm wrong. And I totally messed this up. And I remember there was this consultant that I really respected. And he was like, whoa, this wasn't you. And I was like, wait, it wasn't? But I had like formulated it in my mind to be that way. But ultimately, I think that the reason that I'm confident is because I accept that I'm not going to know everything. And through the years, I've done computers they've been my thing, right? Like I had a lot of self-doubt in the beginning. So I would do things multiple times over and over and over again. And I would be like, oh, there's no way that you came up with that because that solution actually worked. I was really mean to myself, like way back in the day, right? Because I was raised with critical parents. And so if they're criticizing you, then that becomes, the prevailing sound in your head. And so, I would go out into the world and I would be like, well, I can't possibly come up with a solution. But with computers, I would work on it and I was like, oh my God, this actually worked. And then because I was doing it over and over and over to prove myself to myself over and over and over, I was like, oh, this is working out. And I think from there, when I knew that I had like the technical part, it was just working on the me part. And I won't lie, like, oh my God, having a supportive spouse is it's absolutely life-changing to be in a relationship with someone who cheers you on. I know, so I do a lot of community activity. And one of the reasons that I have the time to do it is because my wife is like, hey, you have a podcast tonight. I set you out some tea and, like dinner was like ready. And like, she just creates an environment that I don't have to do as much stuff. Like I don't have as much responsibility. But ultimately, whenever I had my book deal, like she was so proud of me and she tells me that every single day. She's like, you're amazing. And I know that that's like, duh, right? But not every spouse or partner or person is supportive in that way. For instance, my parents weren't. My mom, like whenever I went to Dublin and I won 2 awards there, right? I was there with all of the people I grew up reading, like Kimberly Tripp. It was all of my SQL Server heroes. And I presented there with Rob Sewell, and I also did a lightning talk, and I won the award for lightning talk. And then I won best overall, surrounded by all of the people that I grew up reading their books. And when I called my mom to tell her, she actually said, oh, you won? Were you the only person presenting there that day?
That'd be rough. So, supportive spouse is a big one. I'm a big the thing you said in there that I'd have the hardest time adjusting to was you expect the same from yourselves that you do from others. I'm far more forgiving for other people than I am to myself. If I make a mistake, I'll beat myself up forever. I still remember stupid things I said to my wife back in high school when we did. I still sometimes just have absolute embarrassment over things I said in high school. So to expect to change that, I think it'd be the biggest adjustment is how do I expect the same from me that I expect from others?
It's self-compassion, and you're actually right. There are a lot of times that's literally what my therapist says is, hey, if this was like your little brother, how would you treat it? And I was like, oh, of course. And, of course he would feel that way. Of course he would be sad. Of course he would be upset. And so I think that's what I kind of do is whenever I realize that I'm being too critical, that I do say, what if this was somebody else that I cared for? But that's something that if you want to look it up, it's called self-parenting. And that is a technique to help you with, being supportive of yourself and kind of seeing yourself as a kid that needs some love.
Yeah, something that you mentioned, Chrissy, that kind of resonated with me was how you approach imposter syndrome and radically accept. And that's definitely where my perceived confidence or confidence that I have in myself is. It's that I'm a human. Humans can do amazing things. Every human, with whether you're super intelligent or not, like you can still learn, synthesize new things, contribute. And if any human can do it, I can do it. And other humans can too. It's not just specific to me. Like you mentioned earlier, knowing what you're best at, putting yourself in positions that like lend themselves to your skill, which after hearing you talking about setting boundaries earlier, it seems like you're definitely advanced in being self-aware and emotionally intelligent. And yeah, all those things play a big role in it all.
Agreed.
Right. So this is going to be the hardest hitting question probably of the day for you. Where did potato quality come from?
Man.
It seems so off of all your other branding.
Okay.
Your Git is potato quality.
All right. So my hacker name is Control B because I'm bold, right? But it was already taken on GitHub. And then I did Control BOLD, but then I just looked like Control old.